Okay, so week 8 of 8, this is it, the big finale. Today we're going to talk a lot about quotas. We are hoping to get all of your questions, and there are some of that housekeeping items, which was on another slide here. There we go. So we will do some intros, then we'll want your questions. Type the questions in the Q&A box, and we'll address them as we go. Any context or additional context that you can share will help us. And you can upvote questions if you really see one that you really like to hear an answer to. And of course, we'll share the recording and summary after the session. Let's do some intros. We're going to start on the full cast side, and we'll save Lindsay for the last. I'm Tyler. I head up our customer success team, and Fullcast is a go-to-market planning and execution platform. If you all didn't know, Bala, our co-founder, is with us. Bala, why don't you go ahead and give your intro?
Sure. Bala Bhaskaran, co-founder, CTO. I run product and engineering at Fullcast and have been in and around this problem now for a little over a decade. So happy to contribute my experiences.
And Lindsay?
Hi, Lindsay Cordell. I am the senior go-to-market analyst at Go-to-Market Partners. Before I was an analyst, I held roles in every go-to-market team's leadership. So I've worked in product, I've worked in customer success, I've worked in sales, and I've worked in marketing. But I really cut my teeth on revenue operations or sales operations. So this was definitely a subject that is close to my heart. I have helped many a CRO and finance team work through this plan. And I don't know, I'll start with a hot take. I don't think it's a hot take. It's hard, and it's fundamentally misunderstood by a lot of leadership teams. And I know a lot of AEs that have suffered as a result of poor quota planning. So I'm pretty passionate about the subject. So I'm excited to get started.
Brilliant.
You know, what's funny is you and I were talking before this call, and this is an AMA, and there are no questions yet, but I think it's a great place to start. You would just have some content prepared for us, and I thought it was really interesting, this point of the old way versus the new way. And I just think it'll be a great place to start. And as people start to get the question engine running and we get those questions in, we can start there. What do you think, Lindsay?
Yeah, let's do it. Okay. So imagine, if you will, you have a sales team sitting in front of you and you are doing all of your planning for 2024. And you're trying to come up with your quota plan for the year. So this is what I have experienced in almost every sales role, and I've worked for, 10 CROs over the years. And it typically starts with the annual goal as defined by the board or by the executive leadership team, depending on the size of your organization. And then you look at the number of quota carrying humans you have to carry that burden through the remainder of the year. And you just divide that total requested number by the number of people you have, and that gives you your street quota. And of course, I joke, like, there's variations, of course, like ENT or enterprise employees are going to receive higher quotas than velocity employees, but that tends to be, even once we've subdivided it out, that tends to be the equation. Then we take it to the CRO or the SVP of sales. SVP of sales takes in the number, hems and haws, says, like, I think I can do this, I think I can do that. They spend a weekend like sweating bullets over Excel, trying to figure out, well, if this product line does this and that product line does this, and basically being asked to like be omniscient and future facing and being able to tell the future. And then they provide their input back to the board or back to the senior executive team. And then there's negotiation. And then there we have it. We have our budget quota. And all of this happens in spreadsheets off of a top line goal. And there might be some discussions about, like, well, that quota is too high, we need to hire 3 more reps. And then we get into a ramping schedule. So that might be on a separate sheet. But at the end of the day, this is kind of how it comes. And what we're finding, and so like recent surveys have shown in terms of quota attainment, like in 2020, here, I'm going to go back to this number real quick. In 2020, if we're looking at the AEs, 64% of AEs, and there are about 3,000 AEs surveyed on this, we're at 64% quota attainment, and now finishing, so last year, 44%. And I think we've had another kind of rough year this year. So I'm not anticipating this number going up substantially. on a side note, interesting over here, watching this go from 76 to 55 to 58, but we'll worry about CS's quotas maybe a little bit later.
I mean,
But
that seems just like super low to me. And I'm just curious before we kind of go into this new way, like volatility, like what have you seen attainment typically this low as well? I mean, I always thought it was
Yeah.
like 70%.
No, that was a long time ago. I think it's continuously sort of trended down. You know, to Lindsay's earlier point, there's a lot of bad quota planning, right? And so the attainment numbers tend to suffer because of that.
Yeah.
And it has always sort of trended down. I think even in the even before 2020 was headed towards like almost 50%, 50-60% was kind of where it was hovering. And in tech, it's more specifically, it's interesting to see what SaaS also there's a bit of variance there, but nothing, you know, not too different from what we're seeing here. So that's
I mean, when Slack was acquired, Slack by Salesforce, their average quota attainment at time of acquisition was 26%. And this is Slack.
Yeah.
They must have product. And so what that shows, right, is that the way the expectations of growth within an organization are influencing the top line goals, and the revenue generating teams are the ones that have to take that burden on in some way. And so it's really interesting when, especially in those hyper growth scenarios, I mean, clearly whatever happened between the year that they decided that they could hit much better numbers and then the year that they were finally acquired, that 26% average attainment. And inside of Salesforce, there are divisions inside of Salesforce where the software, you know, we know, right, there's the top line, but if we're looking at Quip or looking at some of the smaller divisions inside of Salesforce, we see lower quota attainment numbers for more particular things. So I think it just goes like, we used to be able to plan kind of the way I described, and there was enough uniformity in our business and in the markets and in buying behavior that was a tried and trusted true, like add in a little growth, but let's make it reasonable. And everybody kind of agreed. But with the market volatility and just like the effects of competitors and the effects of acquisitions and the effects of macroeconomic conditions in more volatile industries like a SaaS, you tend to not be able to rely on that historical data as much, but people who are taught to use exclusively historical data end up, I think, in this spot, because that's how they were taught to do quota planning. They weren't doing anything different than their boss had taught them when they were, you know, sales VPs learning to be CROs. But that's kind of where we're at now. And that's how we end up with this situation right here.
Lindsay, a quick question for you. I know one of the things that, since you were using Salesforce as an example, one of the things that they also pointed out in their annual earnings report was that only about 20% or 20% of the AEs were carrying about 80% of the numbers. And that I don't know how much of that is reflected in this or averaged out in this, but that was also an interesting sort of statistic to understand from Salesforce's standpoint, where 20% of the people were blowing out their numbers and quite a lot weren't making it at all.
Yeah, so I think that was a very scary stat that came from Salesforce. And I think it shocked a lot of people, but I tell you what, and this is one of the things that I kind of talk about, is this idea of when we look at things like average quota attainment, that is a fantastic number for financial planning purposes, but your individual rep performance is really important. And I like looking at my rep performance in quartiles or in thirds at least, to kind of get a feel for how many of my reps are above our like 70% baseline watermark, if that's where we want to put it, or maybe 65 or maybe even 50, and how many are falling below. And then really looking at the plan and trying to figure out how does this happen? Is this a territory planning issue? Is this a product issue? Is this a segment issue? Is this an individual performing rep issue? And again, if it's one or two, we could look at rep performance. If it's more than half your company is hitting below a watermark and the others are still carrying you up to the average number that you're looking for, that's an indication that there's fundamentally something inside of your planning process that's really, there's some detail there that you're not taking into your planning. And as a result of that, what you're doing is you're setting up at least half of your employees to fail, which I don't think anybody would want to put their employees in that position, but there's definitely risk of it if you're not looking at the deeper details. And quite frankly, if you're not willing to spend a little bit more time with RevOps looking at your territory arrangements and making sure that the way that you segmented your business makes fundamental business sense as well.
Yeah, and it's a really costly way of doing it.
Very cost. I mean, your CAC could be severely impacted by this 45% group down here. Think about how much better our CAC would look if we didn't have these reps pulling down the cost of acquisition. It's just definitely something that needs to be considered and thought about as you're thinking about your quota planning, as opposed to this wonderful calculation, which is what a lot of people are doing over the weekend right now as they negotiate their 2024 numbers with their board.
There's a question here that I think is tied to this thread, and we'll just keep holding this new way because it'll probably come into.
I like the anticipation.
You have to wait until the end. So the question here is, from what I've seen, leaders seem to have accepted the quota attainment number and just factored that into the models. Quota attainment's 40%, so we'll just factor that in the models, whatever. And sorry, I lost the thought here. I had to like add a little ad lib there. So factor that into the models rather than trying to fix the quota planning so that attainment is actually higher. It seems like we've seen that. Correct? That is just like they're saying, hey, have you seen that? And maybe we could talk a little bit about the impacts with that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's hardest in sales math, quite frankly, is that you can manipulate it. Like there's a lot of different levers that you can pull on to make outcomes look like what the company is looking for the outcome to look like. And so to get to those honest answers, so whenever I'm doing compensation planning, like I'm a big fan of I like a deeper compensation model. I want it to look simple for the AE, and I never want the AE to be confused about how they get paid. But I believe the back office, I know my RevOps people out there can handle complex calculations. So if you're going to slice up by product line, by territory, by ICP, which would be my ideal scenario, I think we should pay more for getting ICP appropriate customers on board than you would those like emergency deals that you make at the end of a quarter with anybody with money, even if you know that they're going to end up in churn sometime down the road. I'm a big fan of that, but it's complex. So you're going to have to deal with the complexity of really comping people correctly, but it's very easy to game a comp strategy, whether you're a leader trying to show something or you're a rep trying to hit a specific number. And so you really have to think about it from a lot of different angles, so that you make sure you don't put yourself in a position to overpay or underpay or incentivize the wrong behavior, which is really what your game, that wasn't your goal. Like you shouldn't want to be at 75% attainment because you've been asked to, right? You want to be at 75% attainment because it's the right thing to do for your employees and for the promised OTE that we made when we brought them on board. And you've got to really think through the ramifications of any of those financial presentations, because you can really mess with the numbers if you want to.
Paul, do you have anything else to add?
No, I think deadlines are usually the worst motivators in sort of propagating that, because you're running up against a wall and you need to get stuff out to the reps. And I've seen so many people sort of manipulate the spreadsheets to get the results they want so they can get the results out. And typically the quota setting process sort of comes in serially after you do all your territory stuff and all of that stuff has been put together. And more often than not, there's sort of a knock-on effect on territories not getting done in time, which crunches the time available for a deeper analysis of what's going on. And typically you're just trying to get to a deadline with the quotas and the comp plan defined. And it's a bad motivator to actually get stuff done. So I think just giving yourself more time and coordinating with your territory planners and whatnot. I think that that's super important to just keep the process, give yourself enough time to sort of think through the implications of the levers you're pulling, right, on a comp plan. And people tend to overcomplicate the comp plans typically, and that makes it even more harder to sort of do this in an agile way.
What are the key factors that we would recommend when considering setting quotas, and how do we balance ambition versus achievability? This might be a good time to talk about the new way.
I know. I was like, I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about what I think we should be doing.
I mean, it's a little early. We should wait long. No,
I
I'm kidding.
know, but the crowd has asked, and so we shall answer. Okay, so when I'm thinking about, and again, like there are solutions like Fullcast that are just 10 times more sophisticated than what I could show you in a spreadsheet, but I also know there are a lot of people out there doing this with spreadsheets. So keep into account that there are much, much more sophisticated ways of doing this, but if we're all stuck in spreadsheets, this is how I like to break it down. First of all, we need to be looking at our goals by product, by segment, and by motion. And I'll talk to you about motions in just a second. The second thing we need to look at is our attainment history quota. And then if we want something to be different or better, what is the strategic plan that we already have in place to make it better? You can't use quota setting as an opportunity to make your business healthier. You have a plan to make your business healthier. And in doing so, you predict a certain level of improvement or ambition ambition. You have ambitions of improvement that you want to factor into the overall equation in quota planning. And so a lot of times I feel like people end up putting the cart before the horse, where they put the number they want first and then come up with the plan later. And again, I think, well, you're 100% right. A lot of it has to do with the fact that we're rushing. We're rushing into planning. It's already December 12th. I don't know how many of you guys have your quota plans already done. Or how many of you even have your territories or even your total first number that you're going to be starting on January 1st, or for anybody using the offset year, like February 1st, right? We're getting pretty close here. So that crunch is coming in. And so what I always like to think about is there's kind of three things that are really important in setting your quotas. And the first thing I look at is company performance by product, by department, and by segment. And I want us to really look at it. Can this product do more? Yes, and how? Can this department do more? Yes, and how? And can this audience segment do more? Yes, and how? So once we have that data, the next thing I want to look at is the employee performance. So by role, what have they historically been able to produce in each of these sections? And by department, what have they been able to produce against these segments? One of the things that ends up happening, which is very sad, and it's about to start happening like now, quite frankly, probably in Friday's meeting, is we have set a target, an ambitious target for 2023. And we assigned quota according to that ambitious target. And we have achieved a different number. And the board has given us a pass on that number and said, like, yeah, we wanted 9, we got 7. We're okay with 7. But do they ever go back and adjust the quotas down so that people get paid? No, of course not. That would be crazy. And so what I really hate is when a company stands up and says, we have 100% attainment of our goal at 7 million, but we planned for 9, and none of these employees got 100% attainment of their goals. And then having what that does to employee sentiment and motivation, comprehension, and then again, breaking that down by segment and by goal. And so from a very top line perspective, and I can get super deep and detailed about what this might look like. I've got some examples if we want to get into it later, but these are, to me, if we're not breaking up our business in a deeper way and really looking at our individual goals, these top line averages of average quota, average CAC, average NRR, it's really making it difficult as leaders to make decisions off of real information. And so we're making decisions off of goal information, and sometimes it pans out and sometimes it doesn't. And then especially if you've got an ambitious board, it could really not go in favor for the variable comp employees.
Lindsay, how much of external data do you consider in addition to the historical data? And especially in situations where, let's say, you're expanding out into a market where you've had no presence or no historical data, how do you think about planning in that context?
So the way that I like to think about it is, so you can absolutely use data from other sources. Like, I mean, even just buyer intent data gives you a good indication of market volume. What I would want to know that could be hard for us to describe. So if we were starting a venture today, the market looks, the intent, the buyer intent looks X amount big. But what are my odds of penetrating into that market? If I'm working with the same buying committee that I've always worked with, and I understand how I penetrate that buying committee and how I bring them along with me on my plan, I would use my own historical first party data to help me gauge what this new venture could look like. If I'm going into a completely new market, so let's say we're launching in EMEA and we just have no idea what our traction looks like, partner data is really, really helpful in those scenarios if we can get our hand on it. But what I always like to tell, if we're not sure and we're going to go full test mode, what you can't do is bet your employee's paycheck on your ability to start a new venture. And so what I mean by that is it's not acceptable from where I'm standing for us to force an AE to bet their paycheck on a new venture that I have not yet tested, but then expect to pass from the board when I look at my total numbers on what I've achieved in that quarter. And so whenever we're doing something new, expect the business to have to shore up the investment and the compensation, the variable comp side of the house. Otherwise, what ends up happening is the only people who engage with the new venture, especially if they have a choice, are going to be new reps who don't know any better. And existing reps will ignore whatever new venture you've put on the table for them in favor of the tried and true revenue generators. And it takes a lot longer for your new ventures to get traction. And then you end up wondering, is it that I did bad in EMEA? Or is it that my sales approach wasn't right in EMEA? And you'll never know because you've obfuscated the information by putting it in the hands of employees that are deciding what they're going to spend their time on. So it can get really complicated. Did that answer the question?
Yes, it does. Yeah. And the other thing that I've seen people use in new markets, obviously, is the OTE kind of comparables and sort of do a tops down, bottoms up from that standpoint as well to see if you can actually present a competitive bid in the market for salespeople that are looking to hire. Before we jump into the next question, I have another question. We've talked about this from a sales perspective. How do you think about overlay quotas, and what complications beyond what we've talked about does that add?
Yeah, so overlay quotas, very, very interesting. Again, like my RevOps team in the back office, they fully understand everything and how all of the different percentages come together. The rest of the team might not understand it quite as well. So one of the overlays need to be calculated very carefully. Double paying reps because it's the right thing to do. I've heard that happen a lot. It might be the right thing to do for those reps, but what it does is it's actually speaking to a lack of strategic direction inside of the organization. So if you have to use an overlay methodology because the product lines are so complex or diverse, that's when we're going to be walking into, in my opinion, we need to be thinking about more than just, was that deal sold? We need to be looking at how much effort it was. So like, let's put an example that people might recognize. So if we're thinking about Salesforce and Pardot, right? So we have our Salesforce quarterback rep that sold us the CRM, the dominant product in the suite. But they brought a Pardot rep to talk to the marketing team. If they're all talking to the same buying committee and the Pardot rep is almost acting more like a sales engineer for a technology solution, then the cut should look more like a sales rep to SE type relationship. If it truly is a straight overlay where the buying committee are completely different groups of people, splitting it then, small percentages for referrals to make sure the referrals are happening is important. But I would almost think of it as an interplay between two dominant reps that get referral bonuses between them for bringing in again, pipeline deals, and maybe they don't take it all the way to conclusion, but it's not the first rep's fault if the second rep doesn't get the deal done. And if you make those two things attached to one another, you're intrinsically bringing two things together that could damage the sales cycle more than improve it. And so you really need to be thinking about, and so I always bring it back, when in doubt, bring it back to the buyer experience. Do the customer buyer journey process of where do the leads come from? Where does the rep get engaged? When does the supporting team get engaged? How do they get engaged? How much follow-up is required by different individuals in the system? And then I would use that to help me determine, is this more of a referral thing? Is this truly a co-sell? Is this an SE to AE quarterback relationship? Figure all that out first, and then decide who's getting paid for what. Don't start with who's getting paid for what and then work your way backwards, because you could definitely put yourself at risk of overpaying and really putting your profitability and CAC at risk, which is not what you want to be doing.
Well, what you said, the double paying people for the right reason. I say double paying people for the lazy reasons, because you don't actually want to put the effort in to figure that out, because that's so important. And you called out the issues that can come from it. If you start backwards from what you want to pay and then work your way into the process, I've seen so many scenarios like that where the overlays are working against the core reps in sort of closing the deal, because they're not incentivized the right way to kind of do it right. So I've seen quite a lot of nightmares associated with how you do that. One more question, and then because I think this kind of adds to the different layers of quota planning. Manager quotas, right? So we've talked about overlays, we've talked about core reps. What, if any, additional thinking has to go into the manager quotas?
I love that question, because it doesn't get asked a whole lot, honestly. Usually it's, let's look at the team quota and then just make sure that the team gets some percentage to the leadership in a way that will really injure them if they're not leading these teams. So first of all, what's interesting about manager quota is that, again, the variable comp component is there to help incentivize employees that are used to being incentivized by variable comp. Like, that's all they're for. Like, it's so interesting because so I was talking with Todd Capone, sales historian, and I was listening to his podcast on this very subject. It's so funny. You guys should definitely check out the Sales Historian podcast. It's so funny because he was talking about all the quota planning stuff, and it's all of the issues we're still talking about here today. They were talking about 100 years ago with comp planning, but it used to be that basically you paid enough, you as an employee needed to cover the cost of you existing, and then it would be a profit share off of that. And so the reason I bring that up is when we're thinking about our sales leadership is, what are we really looking for them to drive? And if we have to have creative comp plans in order to get those behaviors. So maybe it's that there's a real lack of uniformity across my sales team. So maybe I've got 3 reps that are my high flying rock stars. If I'm in a Salesforce position, right, where 20% of the reps are covering 80% of the quota, or whatever that imbalance was, I would potentially use some of that money to incentivize a normalization across my reps, so that I don't have this risk of what we call hero reps carrying a bulk of the quota attainment and kind of holding us over a barrel as a business. So what the leadership quota management should be, it should be about stabilization and uniformity versus, did I make a top line number? And of course we want them to make the top line number, and we should pay them appropriately if we achieve that. But how they get there is just as important, and it's more important at a sales leadership level, because that's what sets you up for success 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. Those leaders, like, it's fine for the AEs to think quarter by quarter. It's what we want them to do. That's how we've geared them. That's how we've tooled them. But when we get into the leadership ranks, we should be thinking annual. We should be thinking 2 years in advance. And that's the benefit of having these complex comp plans, which they can be frustrating for people. And again, I don't want people to feel like they don't know why they're getting paid for what, but just incentivizing people off of a top line number, it's just going to you're going to create a lot of unforeseen behaviors that you're not managing to, and you could end up paying for things that end up hurting you far, far more next year than you were realizing if you're not really thinking it through.
And some of the side effects is I've seen sales managers prioritize deals with reps they know that can close the business and you know, redirect things and show a bit of bias against those 20% reps that are actually moving really fast and closing deals and not really
They'll
developing.
sit on deals for weaker reps.
Right.
And get the weaker reps paid so they can get what they need done. But really the sales leader is the one doing a majority of the selling behavior. And so they're actually acting as like 3 individual contributors. And I feel for the sales leaders going through that right now that are sitting on, you know, 15 calls for 15 simultaneous deals while also trying to keep on their day job of attending all of the appropriate meetings and holding everybody's one-on-ones. I mean, it's a tough spot for that sales leader. And we should be supporting them and paying them for doing a good job at what they're doing, which is leading a sales team, not just making us money.
All right, I'll shut up now, Tyler. No more questions.
Poor Tyler.
No, I've got a question. No, I'm kidding. There are questions here, but I do have a point because I think this has been super interesting. Because this is stuff that I've seen on our end with customers in the past that do quota planning. And we talk about the top line number, right? And I've seen this time and time again where they get the number from finance, they push it all the way down to the reps, and then they do a bottoms up, however they do the bottoms up. But then when you do the reconciliation, they say, well, top line is what it is. So there's no like additional conversation that's happening with like, and this goes back to way back when we were talking about attainment, right? And sure, they're still just looking at this top line number and not really factoring in, well, what is truly possible from a bottoms up perspective. And I think my point really here is don't disregard the bottoms up. And 2, try to do whatever you do with your bottoms up, make that calculation different than what the top down is, right? And so what I mean by that is if you're like distributing the top line off of potential or maybe just historicals for what each region and segment have done, maybe look at your bottoms up is looking at like potential conversion, whatever that might be. Like the two calculations should be different. And then when they meet, then you have to have discussions around, well, do we need to make adjustments to the top line? I know that that's what everybody the business wants, but this is where we're at. So I think that that's super important. And I've also seen on the manager front where the manager will get a number, top line number. They have to hire, let's say 2 headcount. Let's say they've got 5 fully ramped AEs. They got to go hire 2, but they say you don't get to hire these people until July. So guess who has to make up the 2, essentially, right? Like 6 months of nobody sitting in a seat. It's the manager. So the manager is responsible for that number. And I don't know, like, I think that drives these behaviors, Lindsay, that you were talking about, where managers are on calls and giving deals to the better reps to try and figure out how to make up that number rather than actually having a discussion around, well, we know we're not going to hire till July. So maybe that number that the manager holds isn't the full number that you would expect for 7 ramped AEs. It's 5. It's really 6 over the course of the year, if you think about it, because you have the 2 that are ramping. So those are my 2 cents.
Yeah, you make a really good point. The delaying rep hiring, it really reminds me, I saw this on LinkedIn the other day, and Mallory Lee, she's somebody I've worked with in RevOps, real trusted resource. She's really impressive. And she was kind of joking about how like the get shit done culture. And I kind of laugh a little because like sometimes you literally do shit because you're not spending enough time in order to get it done, you get it done, and it doesn't matter how you got there. And the outcomes are typically in line with that amount of planning. And so one of the things that we've been really trying to hone in on executive teams and leadership teams is to really like break down their business plan in a much more sophisticated way. And so here's like a sample somebody had asked in the chat too. So this kind of fits in line with their question as well. But there's this we need to be breaking down our bets as a business. And we need to decide, okay, if this is our high value segment, so these are people who are buying a talent tool. I don't know who they are other than they want to buy a tool that helps people with their talent. And then we really break down the goal, like who are we addressing with this particular solution? Do we have example clients that we can use to get that historical look like you were talking about, Tyler? And let's decide on the motion. So this is a heavy sales motion in outbound. So we know that the incentivization is going to need to be significant here. And this is our CAC is going to be high on this product. So we just need to know that. And then we need to decide how much revenue we're going to make, look at our ACV, and then look at the opportunities and decide if we're dreaming. And this is a really good way of kind of gut checking, instead of gut checking at the top line of, well, we made 7 last year and people are generally more excited about the economy heading into 2024. So we should be able to make 9 next year. Like, instead of having that discussion, let's really break down what we have the legitimate ability to achieve and run the business like with the resources you have, and really test your theories and find out, can you make this 150 close won opportunities happen? What is your current close rate? Can you can marketing deliver? Let's say we're looking at a 20% close rate. Can marketing deliver 5x leads in this ICP in the appropriate amount of time to make the $6 million happen? And so by breaking your business down, you can kind of start to see where your holes are, and you can also see where your distractions are. And so what I mean by that is, if we look at this line down here, we're looking to make 2 million. We need to close 220 opportunities on this. It's a purely inbound play. So if no salespeople have to be involved and it's more of a PLG, maybe we're okay. We're looking for inside sales order taker type people. And we have a plan and we have a strategy and we're okay with this. Or maybe the better plan is to actually abandon this and spend more time looking at our outbound and our partner programs and figure out how to squeeze an extra million out of this and an extra million out of this. And that's the way that we should be thinking about it. Once we have this map, now we know where the quota people, definitely in outbound, some quota carrying people will live in partner led. And we need to be talking about reseller and ecosystem compensation planning, which is more complex and different than your basic direct sale. So definitely something we need to be thinking about RevOps. But as you work through your plan this way, it stops being about what everybody wishes would happen, and it starts being about what we can legitimately service as a business, and helps you find those gaps.
How do we manage and communicate changes to quotas or targets mid-cycle, especially in response to unforeseen market conditions or internal shifts?
Bala, do you have any thoughts on that, Fred?
Don't change it.
No, it's an interesting challenge because the stability of the goalpost is super important, right? And if it feels like the goalpost is shifting every quarter, it becomes very difficult, especially if your sales motion requires you to invest some time into it to get to a goal. And then by the time you get to the goal, you know, you're no longer on the account, or the number has changed, or whatever. It's very demoralizing for the sales rep to be able to deal with that. So I always say, you know, be very, very careful. It's very easy to go in and adjust numbers, but it's very difficult to make sure you maintain morale in your sales organization when you do that. So it has to be done very carefully. It has to be done with a lot of thought, and a lot of understanding around how long does it take for the sales cycle, what sort of an investment people are putting into the sales cycle to actually get the result. Communication, I think, is, you know, like most things, most change management, you have to sell it. You have to really be able to express why you're changing it, why it's a good thing for the reps and also for the business. More often than not, you know, that part of it gets missed, that change management gets missed. And typically you just push out numbers to the managers and say, oh, talk to your reps and tell them this is their new number. And that's very hard. So I think that's definitely something that has to be done thoughtfully, has to be done with the idea of really explaining to everyone involved why these changes are necessary and what that's going to get the business, right? So, yeah, I mean, I think focus on the change management, focus on that aspect of it.
Yeah. And I think too, one of the things that's interesting in all of my years, and I've trained over 1,000 reps at this point, there's nothing more amazing than when you do like a comp change on a bunch of AEs in a conference room together. Like I've watched everybody's head go down, and I wasn't like, are we praying? And they were doing sales math in their heads. It's really impressive. But the reason salespeople are with you and they're partnering with you in this endeavor more so than any other employee that you have on staff is because they believe that you can win together. And so if you take away that surety of their success, it's going to impact your success. So I absolutely agree, making sure that the plan really does make sense for the reps. And if something is changing in the marketplace, that's just like, let's say we're a production manufacturing company and we just can't get any more cars. They're not coming. And we are in a tough spot. Again, it's something that you can explain to them, but how the make it right path is just as important as the explanation of why. And so what I've seen done is I've seen quota coverage requirements get eased. I've seen multipliers, like gated multipliers, push back a little so that they can maybe, if they hit what the original plan right was, if you hit 80%, you would have like a +1 point on every piece of business that you earned after that point. Maybe we can pull that back a bit. So again, it's a little bit of like give and take of like, look, macroeconomics have impacted our business in such a way that it's so dire that we have to adjust the plan. Here's how I'm going to help you get back to winning. And that's what the good sales leaders end up doing, is they actually take the quota adjustments back to their office and they build calculators on their own for how they're going to explain this to the people who work for them and say like, okay, well, there are no more cars, but we can sell motorcycles. And these are the motorcycles that I've gotten on your behalf. And I've already lined up marketing to help you learn how to sell motorcycles since you have no idea what any of these words mean. And that's where, again, quotas might look like they only impact your variable comp employees that are directly affected by them. But if you don't think that like a demoralizing quota shift doesn't affect marketing, that's crazy. It should affect marketing. It should affect everybody. Customer success is heavily impacted when the sales team has been given bad news. So the entire organization needs to be put in a position to rally around the new plan with the adjustments, whatever they are. And as long as we show everyone how we can win, we've done the best that we could. But just kind of trying to do it in the background, they're gonna close their eyes, they're gonna do the math, and they're gonna make a choice in that moment. And that choice might be to do the right thing for the company, or that choice might be to do the right thing for them, or that choice might be to put their frustration over on marketing and the crummy leads they perceived they received last month that led to this whole disaster. It can be really far reaching. So never discount the impact that change can have across your entire go-to-market team.
Yeah, and I think you made a good point about sort of managers figuring out how to communicate it. And that's super important, like when you're making these changes for the RevOps leadership to actually provide the managers with the tool to have that conversation. Because what tends to happen is the good managers will figure out a nice way to sell it. And the managers that are new or are struggling with how to phrase it, set it up, you're going to end up with teams that are unhappy and other teams that may be okay with it, and that it's never a good situation when that happens.
Can we give a hypothetical example of the same quota plan and what it looks like to an AE and what it looks like on the RevOps side? My team gets so in the weeds that they struggle to accurately create the AE facing version of the quota plan.
Oh, I could see that. Okay. Well, I can show you right now the what it should look like on the RevOps side. And honestly, kind of what we could do with it. Actually, I think I can help with this. Okay. So the first thing so this is a relatively complicated comp plan. So I've put a pretty complicated comp plan in front of all of us as an example, because I hate oversimplifying things that are really hard. So in this case, I've got 2 products that I'm selling, 2 lines of business, my tried and true product and my new offering. I have done the white before. This is all of my information from last year, and these are my big bets for 2024 in the orange. And so what I've done is I've broken down by segment. The goal is $1 million. I've also looked at profitability. The other thing I really want us to pay attention to as we're thinking about NRR and retention as a key metric going forward, now that we're kind of out of this like growth at all costs mode in a lot of businesses. Let's look at our ACV, our 3-year LTV. I don't think we need to go much further than that unless you're selling a massive enterprise, like embed borderline on-prem solution. But let's look at our 3-year LTV, and let's look at our typical sales cycle. And then I'm looking at specifically what I want to incentivize. And in this case, I want to incentivize speed and low cost pipeline conversion. I know these people aren't going to stick around forever. I lose 1 in 3 deals that I sell, I end up losing over 3 years. So I'm planning for that going forward, that churn. So what I've done is in this case, I've got 33% profitability on this particular product line. I'm giving 8% of that to my AEs, very generous. And I've provided kickers for faster close and kicker for pipeline conversion. What this looks like on the back end to RevOps is a complicated set of like date conversion metrics, right? Because I know we're looking for under 20 days. I'm also looking for nasty behavior. Like, oh, well, I just won't put in my deal until I know it's going to close, and then I can just put it in then, and that will work too. I'm also looking for information on the cold to one, the definition of cold. I'm going to need to be able to give that to marketing. So what this looks like to my AEs is these 3 bullets. And maybe I won't be totally upfront about my profitability. I'll probably like get rid of that part and just have my standard and my kickers. And then I'd have the ROE on how you get to these kickers really well laid out. But it looks almost more like a contract in a set of words. And then I would accompany it with a calculator so that they could calculate it on their own. And it would incorporate things that are important to me, like the date that the lead was, like where the lead was pulled from, how the lead was delivered, how quickly the deal transacted, and maybe even give them a, like, if you can get this done in the next 2 days, alert, you're going to earn an additional, $1,000 on this deal, whatever it ends up being. So these are the things that I would want to give to them, fully knowing that our back office calculations are probably going to be a large spreadsheet that deals with all of this. And then if we take it down to even more complicated scenarios where we're bringing in supporting team members like a solutions engineer, and they're going to get paid a piece, or maybe it's an overlay, AE gets a slice of this as well. So again, making it very clear for just the AE, for the supporting team members, what all of these things are, almost in words versus math, and then give them an accompanying calculator. And the words have to cover every possible loophole you could think of. And then, like I said, in the back, we've got a big spreadsheet that helps us keep track of how all of this should play out in our planning. Hope that helps.
Yes.
That was, yes. That was well said.
Tyler, he's like, oh gosh. This lady came with content.
Right. You're ready.
Great.
You're succinct, ready. There's nothing else to add. We do have one more question, unless Bali, you had anything else to add to that.
No, I think Lindsay covered what I would have said. So
cool. How do you ensure a fair distribution of quotas across different sales territories and teams?
Bali, you should take that one.
Yeah. I've seen it a bunch of different ways. In a maturing organization, a smaller sales team, or when you have a team that's just getting built, usually you create sort of profiles based on tenure and ramp and whatnot. And you sort of say, okay, if you're a fully ramped senior AE, this is the quota you're carrying. If you're a mid AE, that's the easiest calculation you can do. And I've seen a lot of quota planning and quota setting happen that way in very sort of fast-growing organizations that are just maturing. And that's easy I think, on the RevOps teams to be able to do that when there isn't a whole lot of historical data to pull on, and there isn't a whole lot of even attribution that you can count on reliably to be able to use in your math, right? So that's sort of the, but it does achieve that fair distribution, right? Where you get a little bit more complex is when you're trying to incorporate intent data, when you're trying to incorporate potential, or however you define potential, and sort of these forward-looking signals as a way to sort of define the size of the market, and then set distribution of quota based on that. That's where it gets interesting. I mean, you can naturally, what I've seen organizations try to do is get to one number, right? And it's almost always very difficult to do that, but it's simpler when you can quantify your say bookings potential in a market with a dollar number that you can put out there. Now there's dangers to doing that because of issues with data quality and all of those kinds of things. But that also gives you sort of one definition of things that you're shooting for. So it makes the discussion easier, but it also has a lot of pitfalls associated with trying to do that. The more complex version of this, of course, is as Lindsay was sharing, break it down by segment, break it down by product, and sort of have a definition for each one of those. And I think, Lindsay, you called out the motion as well, because depending on the sales motion that you're driving, the time it takes for you to reach that potential could be very different in different sales motions, right? So I think that distribution, that explanation of how you break that down, and then being able to set the quota based on some variant of that is I would say how you can define fairness, right? And be able to explain that and have a proper description of what fairness means. I think that's the way I would put it, but that's how I've seen it done.
I'll say the Lindsay's slide, like maybe about 40 minutes ago, with all the key components of that, was just a great summarization of that. But I mean, one could argue that distributing territories and accounts fairly will then actually mean that quota is fair.
Yeah.
Right. If you do all the quota calculation correctly, you've got all your quota, figured out for each rep and each team, each team and segment and product and all of these things, then taking the time to properly balance the territories across those like reps would actually be the fair thing to do, not just the quota setting process.
And you're not going to get the calculation right on these things, right? And there's always exceptions. Like I remember one time we had this beautiful model built out. It was spitting out numbers like crazy. And one of the things that we hadn't accounted for in the model was that if you close the business in Q4 with that company, the likelihood of you closing business next year is quite low, right? Because you've already sold it to them. Well, the model didn't take that into account and said, oh yeah, there's all this money to be made in the company. And so, however you try, you're not going to get all the variables. So one of the things that I've seen done effectively is provide a way to override those numbers. We'll provide a way to override those with discussions and things like that, that allows the sales managers and sales leaders that are on the ground to be able to give you feedback and incorporate that feedback. It's you can't just spit out a number and expect it to satisfy all the conditions that you might see on the street. So whatever model you build, allow for exceptions, allow for things to be overridden in that with proper justification, of course. But I think that's also pretty crucial to how you define fairness, because sometimes the data scientists can spit out a potential number that cannot be changed, but the market conditions don't really reflect that reality, and that could be a problem as well.
Yeah, I think that really having a plan for like worst case scenario in that territory, like if everything were to go wrong, what would that look like and how would they manage around that? Like have a bit of a doomsday week, if you will, with all of your data points. The other thing that we're really realizing it, and we're seeing it more reflected in the marketing data, but my RevOps team, I know you're seeing all that data as well. As much as we have like the buyer intent data, the buyer intent data got incredibly wonky with all of the adjustments in the economy. So there are people who were researching 3 years ago that ended up buying, but now the reason people are researching, the reason people are looking at things seems to have shifted. And so there might even be a new, I would be looking at your definition of those territories. So let's say we're going to be looking at enterprise accounts. Enterprise accounts, retail, big box, Walmart does not buy the same way that Target buys. And so to assume off of a couple of firmographic elements that we could pull from a sales nav or a similar solution that we could predict the buying behavior inside of that business is unlikely. And so I really encourage companies to think about, like, according to your buying committee and what it takes to move a sale through for you, what are the variables that we need to source to help us with our territory assessment? And it might not be the most accessible data points in the world. I'm very sorry, RevOps. But it's information that we could be gathering from first party engagement with our marketing campaigns of, oh, they seem, this territory seems overly predisposed to searching for this type of product, of which we know we struggle to sell through. And even though we have these other 5 products, there's literally no buyer intent in that territory that indicates that those other 5 products would be of interest. So either we figure it out with marketing how to make there be interest, or we don't assume that there's interest there and just hope for the best. So I definitely like blending your first party data that you're collecting through your marketing channels and your campaigns, as well as our third party intent data, as well as past performance. And then just the fundamentals of that business. Like if we could understand the difference, like from my enterprise reps out there, are they centralized buying? Are they divisional buyers? Are they divisional buyers by region versus divisional buyers by like city?
Yeah.
I mean, it can get complicated really fast. And so what might look like on paper a very lucrative potential account could be an account that takes so much work, it's not worth it for us anymore. And so that's where I think the human element, Bala, that you were describing of like, okay, we put all 3 big box retailers in the same position because we assumed they'd all behave differently. We have since discovered nuances, and we have prepared for those nuances. So now we know what to do to change things. So maybe we're not going to look for, if every single Walmart buys this product individually, we need an army of sales reps to sell this stuff to Walmart. Let's take Walmart off the table because this is not going to work for us. Whereas Target continues to be a centralized buyer with a distribution head. Absolutely. They are like number 1, number 2, and number 3 client. And we need to put the whole team on that. And it's a complete, but until we're there and we're in the sales cycle and we're having the conversations, we couldn't possibly know everything. So be honest about what you don't know and have a plan for how you're going to adjust, and have that doomsday plan in the back of your mind. And that will allow you to have those moments of fairness. And I definitely would encourage you guys to figure out how to have marketing help you source interest in your solution prior to territory building, not after territory building, and then trying to like force a product into a market that had no interest in it, and then expect the quota carrying reps to deal with that burden of lack of interest on top of what they've already got on their plates.
Done.
I know it's so easy for me to say from here, I'm not in your quota planning meetings, but if any of these tips are helpful, I hope at least one of these tips were helpful for you.
Oh yeah, they're all.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Bala, for coming on and imparting your wisdom around quota planning. Thank you all for joining. This was our last AMA, so I think we'll probably see you all in the new year.
All right. Thank
All
you,
right.
Tom.
See ya.
Thank you, Lindsay.